introduce our guest plenary speakers this morning. We have Victoria Collins, who is a senior policy analyst with the Office of Federal Financial Management with OMB. She recently served as acting chief of management controls and assistance branch in that office. And I think most of you, like me, probably remember her from her time working with us on uniform guidance, development, and implementation. And in case, like me, you wonder, where did she go? She was there all the time, and then she disappeared. So for the 2 years before she was the acting chief, she served as career deputy of the cross-OMB team supporting a cabinet-level interagency task force working to make the federal government a better partner for state, local, and private governments and their private sector partners. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
It sounds very impressive. We appreciate the work and appreciate you being here. We also have Chris Selesnik with us, and he's also familiar to us with FEP. He's worked a lot with our ERA group in particular. He is in his role serving as the lead of the HHS Section 5 grants pilot effort. He has over 20 years of experience in the federal government management. He served at Patents and Trademark Office, HUD, TSA, and joined HHS in 2006. So rather than go through a lot more of your lengthy careers, we'll turn this over to you so that we will have time for questions at the end. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, hello everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see all of you, see many of you again. It's a pleasure to be back, and you're lucky to be here. I think just in your honor, Washington, D.C. has decided to let up on the insane summer heat, so well-timed. And I understand we are now officially the last thing between all of you and getting home ahead of a hurricane, so we will try to make it snappy. We are here today to discuss grants under new management, and in particular, focusing in a little bit on the Data Act implementation. I know all of you are aware of the Data Act, which was really aimed at improving our financial spending transparency. There was also a pilot on reducing reporting burden associated with that, and I know many of you participated in that effort, so thank you. And we recently concluded a piece of it with a big report to Congress that OMB submitted on August 10th. And so this is perfect timing to come and spend a moment with all of you to discuss the pilot, what we learned, what the recommendations were, and some of our next steps as we conclude that effort and start to look forward for the next few years. So with that, just a quick kind of background on the Data Act itself. Passed back in May 2014, required the establishment of government-wide standards, simplification of reporting, and improving the quality of the data. How many of you are familiar with the old usaspending.gov website? You've looked at it, you've taken a look around. How many folks have taken a look at the new beta.usaspending.gov site? A few. Okay, that's good, but not as many. So I would encourage you to do it. What's actually really cool about the Beta USA Spending site and the implementation of the Data Act in general is, yes, we established government-wide data standards and did a whole bunch of new reporting of account-level information to the public. But what really was transformative that happened for the first time as part of Data Act implementation was that we linked account-level information about the money that federal agencies have that's appropriated from Congress to the awards that they make with that money. So now you can track the dollars all the way from what was appropriated to what was actually spent. So there's a little preview. There's the new site, a teaser. I encourage you all to go visit it. And I thought, before we launch into the pilot and I turn it over to Chris here to give you kind of the in-depth review of what we learned, I thought I'd give you a quick tour of what's on the new site. So how many folks here are at all interested in what NSF spends on research? Few? Okay. So here we have the National Science Foundation Research and Related Activities account, total budget authority of about $6 billion, 48.3% of which has been obligated for this year. So here's just an example of what you can find on the new site if you're looking for a particular agency and their account information. And then what's cool, I think, maybe I'm a little bit of a spending transparency nerd here, so forgive me, but you scroll down and then you can see that account information broken out 3 different ways. One is program activity, and that is actually information that kind of tells you what the different what was sort of the substance of what that money was spent on. So for this particular account, a few examples of those are mathematical and physical sciences, geosciences, engineering, biological sciences, and so on and so forth. Other ways that money is broken out is by object class, and then the final way is the Treasury account symbol. And that gets into just slightly more detailed accounting information. And then you keep scrolling down, and here are the 9,124 grant awards under that account that NSF has. And so you can really start to follow these dollars now from the appropriations to the awards that were made. And anytime an award is updated or extended or something happens on that account, you can see that information coming through here. So not to pick on anyone, but here is a $23 million grant to Florida State University that I just happened to click on. And here's the page that you can see then that gives you the period of performance, the primary place of performance, the grant type, the CFDA number, the program description, etc. That, in a nutshell, kind of gives you what the Data Act did. Because now we can really go for all of our federal spending across all of our agencies and track it from what was appropriated, what is the total budget, and really where is that money going. And I think probably all of you can use your imaginations now to start thinking, and this is where we'll kind of come back to at the end of the discussion today as we're crafting the President's management agenda and thinking about the next 4 years going forward. What else would you want to see now that you've gone this far? What, as a taxpayer, what more should we be making transparent that helps us instill a sense of accountability for our taxpayer dollars, understand where the money's going, and also that really helps us manage it effectively and make those best decisions about how we manage our grants. So with that, we'll go into the Section 5 pilot to reduce administrative burden. And maybe just one thing as I turn it over to Chris here, this pilot was for OMB to think about how we reduce reporting burdens. If you go back to this slide, and we're talking about a grant to Florida State University, obviously we can't report that information without getting a thing or two from Florida State University. And so the Data Act really kind of starts to make clear that this is not just federal data that we're reporting to the public. It's data that originates somewhere else with the public as part of the grants management cycle, as part of all the information that we share back and forth through applications and award making and reporting and so on and so forth. And so it really shows you how this data is part of an ecosystem, and we have to think about how we manage it efficiently. And I think we all, everyone in this room, probably helped as the Data Act was being crafted to sort of surface the perspective that if you're going to require agencies to report information, you have to think about the administrative burden associated with that, how much it costs to collect that information. And so the Data Act really did take that into account, and at the same time it required agencies to report more information to the public. It also required us to think about how to be more efficient and less burdensome with how we collect that information from the public in the first place. And so that's where you have a pilot, which I should just sort of start by saying, we divided it into 2 sort of sub-pilots, if you will. One for procurement, and that piece was led by the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the General Services Administration, which provides a lot of government-wide systems that support the procurement process. We will not be talking in great depth about that piece of the pilot today. The other half of the pilot was led by the Office of Federal Financial Management and our colleagues at HHS, which really focused on reducing reporting burden for grants management. And so with that, let me turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, everybody. wow, it's hard to believe 2 years have gone by quickly. The first time I addressed the FDP on this particular subject, we were just talking about there were going to be pilot tests in kind of an esoteric sense, very high level. You had a lot of questions. We didn't have a lot of answers at that time. But through partnerships like with the one with FDP, we helped develop test models that we've put together. Now here we are, the report has gone to Congress. We've done a lot of work over the last few years. When I say we, I just don't mean we as the government, but I mean we as people like you sitting out there. Well done. There's been a lot of great engagement that's gone on, a lot of good information we've collected, and we're very happy about that partnership that we've gone through. Although the report has gone to Congress, and you could see by some of the slides that Victoria presented earlier and that you will see later in this presentation, this isn't the end. It's just the starting point for all of this. Other legislation will come someday. You know, there's always something that comes, there's always a follow-up act. But even without that type of statutory guidance, there's initiatives that OMB is already starting based on the recommendations to start moving things forward. And that's a very exciting time for anybody who works in the federal grant sector, is involved with financial reporting, performance reporting. A lot of good things are coming out of this. As you can see on this slide here, we're talking about the national dialogue. That was our first outreach mechanism that we did with the public. We had 4,000 people respond to that, 600 users, or 4,000 responses, I should say, 600 users, 65 different ideas. So we had 600 people that took the time to go in there and put ideas out there about different areas, about grants reporting and reducing burden, contract reporting burden and all that, and 4,000 different responses. We took that information and we helped distill that down and use that to develop test models. Test models for the contracts pilot, test models for the grants pilot. So, you know, very early on, we started to engage people, and we were very happy about the level of engagement we've seen. Next slide, please. So, we're going to just skip the little title page here, and I'm going to go to the participation slide. I can't say this for sure, but as a total fact, but I can say this with some degree of certainty. This was one of the largest outreach efforts the federal government has ever done with the grantee community. As you could see through our 6 test models that are listed in the chart there, we had participants throughout the 5 of the 6 different test models, because if you remember and if you've been tracking the pilot, there was one test model, the Cedar 2 test model, which was an internal test where we didn't engage the public. We ended up with 501 people participating in pilot tests, which is phenomenal. To put that in context, if you remember or know anything about the GRIP report that was held during the Recovery Act, they had 9 participants in that. So this is a tremendous amount of input that we've received from the community. We want to say thank you for your participation. If you look at the pie chart on the right side there, demographic distribution, you can see that we had a nice, different, diverse population through the test models. If you see there, higher education was 27%, state and local government 23%, even federal government participants at 12%. That represents the people sitting in this particular audience right here, right now. There's your participation and where you fed into this. In order to engage you, we did a lot of different activities. We had newsletters that we sent out to external stakeholders and test participants. We had our Data Act PMO website, which had all the test models and allowed you to learn about the Data Act in general. And then we had our Twitter account, which we used to, through the use of social media to reach out to different groups, which was very successful. These were things that allowed us to have a lot of different interaction with different people. Not everybody's a social media person. I don't have Facebook or Twitter. I have Twitter now just because I had to track this. I probably will never tweet again, in all honesty. In all honesty, I never tweeted at all. The young lady who did all the tweeting is sitting right up here in the front, so. So I still didn't have to do a lot of social media. But as you can see here, we've had a lot of participation. And what did that result in? That resulted in us getting the information from you as a community through the test models to help formulate the recommendations. Next slide, please. If you've been tracking this, these test models, as you know, will be very familiar. The CEDAR 1 test and the CEDAR 2 tests were the tests where we used the CEDAR library to see about reducing recipient burden if you had information available, in this case, data standards. The CEDAR library, there's some facts there I want to point out to you. Right now, there's currently 11,842 data elements. Respondents with access to the library through the test were able to more quickly complete data collection tools. 30 out of the 115 OMB approved standard forms request similar or duplicate information. We learned that through the CEDAR 2 test. What does that tell us? There's an area right there where we can immediately start looking to reduce burden by consolidating these forms and getting rid of duplication. And it tells us there's probably other duplication in there as we start expanding CEDAR's information base. We'll start illustrating that. 10 of the notice of funds availables reflected 371 duplicate data requests of applicants. We only looked at 10. That wasn't a boil down to 10. That's just what we found. We went out, looked at 10 random NOFAs, and this is what we came up with. If we do additional searches, what else will we find? Again, this is a starting point. It's not an end point. It's telling us that there's duplication out there that we need to address. One of the questions that always came up about the CEDAR library was, you know, it's a pilot system. Is it going to be around? Are you going to maintain it? I am happy to report that HHS has made the decision. They are going to keep the library operational and online. Ownership has been transferred to our Office of the Chief Information Officer. The woman who is the system administrator and project lead, that worked for me, Debbie Kramer, who's been up here and you have interacted with, is moving with the system. She's staying involved with the system. And for those of you that know Amy Hazeltine from the Department of Health and Human Services and her prior work with FDP, is now in the office that has taken ownership, and she is back as the champion for CEDAR. So CEDAR is going to be around. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. We've pledged the support, we've pledged the funds to keep it operational. There's a lot of good work on CEDAR going on. I suggest if you haven't been out there in a while, go take a look at it. It's probably a lot different than what you remember it. Next slide, please. Consolidated federal financial reporting. This particular test is where we actually used a consolidated method of putting information into our payment management system. Again, we were able to determine that by having this revised methodology of inputting financial information and report information into a system, it has cut down burden in a couple of ways. One, the number of errors that we're seeing from original submissions has cut down, so you don't have to go through and keep re-putting information into a system. It happens in more of a real-time fashion, so instead of having weeks or even months delay by the time you submit something to payment management and then you have to go back and correct it, you might not remember what you did or you have to round people up. Now it's real-time. Again, I'd like to announce on this one that HHS is going to keep expanding its work on this through our Administration of Children and Families, ACF. They are going to expand the number of programs going into this pilot, and it's something HHS is looking at implementing down the road. But there is still continued work in this. So again, another one of the pilot initiatives will keep going after the pilot. Next slide, please. Single audit test. This is a test where we worked very closely with OMB. We worked closely with OMB on all the tests, but we worked extremely closely with OMB on this test and the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. What we did learn here from the use of this template, that auto-population and the ability to develop that CFA with reduced number of steps has reduced burden, and we do believe the number of errors has cut down based on some brief overviews. I mean, because of the audit cycle we're going through now, a lot of that information hasn't been looked at through the eyes of a set of auditors yet. but nonetheless, what we've seen in there is very positive. I can tell you that the Federal Audit Clearinghouse is currently going to expand this capability, and somewhere in 2019, they will actually use this format moving forward. This has a lot of advantages. Because of the standardized structure of doing this, you could start automating your particular systems to match what needs to go into the clearinghouse. It also helps the federal government. I'm going to shrill for my new job for 1 second. I've been tasked to take over for the Department of Health and Human Services the task of automating the assignment, the business case management, and then eventual collection of analytical data for HHS, working very closely with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So I will continue working with Victoria and her group and with the clearinghouse, but there's back ends to that as well, because we're going to get better data through this process. So again, another ongoing effort. All of these test models, as you will see, drove the recommendations that went into the report to Congress. Next slide, please. Notice of award proof of concept. This one, I know, is one of the darlings, FFDP. You guys were very active in the creation of this test model, and I will also say, if you weren't a FDP person who participated in this test model, we had standing room only in that room. I had people sitting up here taking that test. We had people sitting on floors. The response to this was overwhelming, and we want to really thank you for your work on that, plus the input that we received from the FDP on this. The white paper that you had generated on NOFAs, I want to let you know it went into creating this test model, but it didn't stop there. We have that white paper. Our office, our division of grants that actually runs grants policy for the department has that, and they're aware of it. It is something they've gone through and will continue to go through. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's going to drive every future decision, but I will say it's something they will take into consideration. Having your voice heard has been very worthwhile. So again, we've obtained a lot of knowledge through this, and there's future decisions being made that will be driven by the data we collected from this test model. Learn grants. I did see some grants.gov people in here, so I'll try not to speak too far out of turn on that. But again, we did discover that people had access to Learn Grants, and all the information in the Learn Grants tab were more accurately able to complete their grants management quiz. If you weren't familiar with that, we actually did a couple of tests. You took a test on grants knowledge, then we gave you access to Learn Grants, had you take the test again. And the scores, with the exception of one person of all the testers, went up. There was one person who's not part of FDP, let me just say that right now, whose score actually went down. We're not quite sure what happened there. Maybe it was a technology issue or something, I don't know. But scores went up, accuracy went up. So again, Learn Grants, the Learn Grants tab is on grants.gov. It's very prominent. We know from the feedback we received in the surveys that a lot of grantees use this as a tool to teach and help guide their subrecipients with different projects. So that is a resource that's out there, and it will continue to be available moving forward. Shall we talk about the report?
I suppose we shall.
All right.
The big news about the report to Congress is that it's out, it's done, and you all may read it. It's available on the OMB website. It's very exciting reading, so I encourage you all to take a look. I think really the sort of bottom line and worth getting of the report is the recommendations, and OMB pulling together the work of both HHS and our colleagues in the procurement community, really focused in on 3 joint recommendations that we all collectively put forward. The first, I think, is really kind of at the core of our work here that has been going on for years, and this pilot, I think, really honed in on the value of standardizing our data elements. And so this is pursue further standardization of our data elements to streamline reporting. I think we've seen really that the power of what we can do, for example, in our reporting on usaspending.gov really is driven by what we are able to standardize, not just within communities in government and outside of government, but across different lines of business, so that we can harmonize that information and report it up together. And really, I think in the federal government, it's a little bit of a misnomer that we don't have the information out there. We do, it's out there, it's just that there's so much of it in so many different ways, it's hard to really make sense of. And so standardizing data is really, I think, where we have a lot of opportunities to have big wins in terms of efficiency, in terms of how that data is used. And I think the Cedar Library really in particular was a great first step, where just by taking the data elements outside of a form and putting them in an electronic database, I think, as Chris said, they have 11,000 data elements in there. Only 100 plus, 112 or so are actually standardized data elements. But all those 11,000 data elements are in the electronic database. And that alone, I think we found was very valuable to people, because now anyone who has any kind of external digital tool, or anyone who's innovating on how to make their own processes more efficient, has an electronic partner where you can kind of get that information, get the definition, and work on it. So as we standardize and harmonize those pieces of information, I think those efficiencies will be all the more going forward. So that's, you want to jump in?
Can I interject for one second?
Please.
While Victoria's on the Cedar Library, one other thing I want to mention, we said this is an ongoing process. Cedar now has the capability, Victoria brought up there's only a little over 100 elements in there that are standardized. We now have the capability in Cedar, if you want to look at a data element and if you want to provide feedback on that element, the capture mechanisms are in the library. You could go in there, you could place a comment, you could send that to HHS. We monitor that. We forward that to the appropriate parties, of course, OMB and others as necessary. So you still have a feedback mechanism out there. If you're looking at something and saying, why do they define it like this? Or maybe this or that, or have you considered, or why do you have multiple definitions of this? The feedback mechanism is there for you to still participate in this process.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an excellent point, that the feedback door is very much still open. And I think, this next, the next recommendation here is a good link between Cedar and some of the other pilots. So elimination of duplication, I think no one here would be against that. But really, we really kind of honed in on that. We need to seize opportunities where we find them to use information technology that can auto-populate, the submit once, use many times with respect to our data elements. So regardless of what this back-end systems may be that different agencies use, the user interface to an outside partner should be as seamless as possible. And if you've reported that information once, you've already entered your name, your address, your organization name, etc. We already have that. Let's just feed it right back to you and not make you enter it 5 different times in 5 different places. So I think, that was the single audit pilot, I think really did that particularly well by really actually consolidating 2 separate information collections into one, and that is something that we will be making permanent going forward. The FFR pilot did that by consolidating the financial reporting and the payment system information, so you only had to enter it once instead of twice. As Chris said, those programs that tested that will continue doing it and are exploring how to expand that further. And then I think, the Cedar 2 library and the notice of award are also both very interesting in this respect, because the Cedar 2, as Chris said, identified that of all the forms that we had approved in the OIRA database, a certain number of them were highly duplicative, or we asked for that information in a highly duplicative way. And it's just so interesting to me how technology has changed, where in the past, if you had a piece of paper asking for the exact same thing, that is absolutely administratively burdensome. And it still is, but now as we're using information technology and electronic information entry, having the same piece of information, obviously you'd rather have it once than twice, but at least it's identical. That kind of almost gets at the data standardization we're driving towards, that we need to make those pieces of information identical so that you then only have to enter them once rather than twice. And so I think that actually is a really good starting point for us to harness kind of where we do have those data elements that if they aren't standardized, they're very close to a standard that we can build off. So I think that was very exciting there. And I think it's also worth saying the procurement pilot also tested a reporting module that really allowed the centralized collection of that data in a less burdensome, duplicative way, and had very good results on that as well. And then the third is leveraging information technology open standards to rapidly develop technology. I think this really built off the way in which these tools were built and tested, that by using open standards, we can build very quickly on best practices, share what we've learned, and hopefully actually use some of the lessons learned from the procurement pilot in their kind of centralized reporting tool to start thinking about linking all those different government-wide systems that we have. So I know you heard from grants.gov earlier that they have some really exciting new tools they're starting to work on. Many of you are familiar with the IAE and the different interfaces as you're registering in SAM, so on and so forth. Then you see this information popping up on USA Spending in the back end. Chris just mentioned the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, where you're going to submit your single audits. So I think more and more we're trying to look at how we can integrate those and make them fit together seamlessly, so that it's less of a, you need like 5 different maps for which system and when, and hopefully in the future we can make that a much more seamless user experience. So where do we go from here? I think, we've given you the kind of next steps on each of the kind of individual pilots and where we're going in the immediate term with what we've learned. But there's both sort of a short-term and a long-term thing that I would say, as opposed to where we go next. So the short term is actually very short term, just in the next 12 weeks. This is a 12-week sprint, as we call them, in the hackathon style, to develop digital tools with federal data sets that improve grants management. So this is just kind of we don't want to waste any time. We've learned so much from this pilot about using information technology to reduce administrative burden and trying to connect all the federal data that we have more efficiently to the public and to the people who are partners in creating and using that data. So this is a 12-week sprint that kind of gets at what is that last mile gap that we have between the federal government, which has, as many of you know, a very slow process for building new tools, where we have to do a lot of collaborating across our entire enterprise, identifying requirements, going through a procurement process, identifying a partner, building, prototype. It can be years, and by the time you've built it, like, the world has changed. So this is a really quick, informal, not procurement, but kind of collaborative way to work together with the tech community and just sort of brainstorm, here are our tools, here's our data, what can we do, what should we do, and engage interested members of the public as well who have ideas about how these systems could be more efficient, or this data could be better used. So if anybody's interested, the website's up there, but also I welcome anyone to reach out to me who'd like to be more involved. It's just a quick 12-week sprint, but it's going to help us keep the momentum from this pilot as we work toward our longer-term goal, which is the President's Management Agenda. So I'm sure many of you have heard about this since the new administration came in, but we are really doing an incredibly thoughtful and deep government reform process that's leading to the creation of the President's Management Agenda, which will be published next February with the President's budget request to Congress. And so many of you, I know, saw the executive order and the OMB memorandum that directed agencies to really kind of develop and submit to OMB deep reform plans, reorganization ideas, streamlining the federal workforce. What could we really do, blue sky, to reimagine how the federal government would be organized to be more efficient? And agencies, to their credit, especially HHS, I think, have really taken that seriously and are doing, I think, really robust processes to engage their own stakeholders in how they could be more efficiently organized, including around all of these things we've talked about. And I think HHS in particular has internalized these lessons of the Section 5 pilot to start to bring to OMB the ideas about what could we do, building on all of this work, to be more standardized and integrated in our presentation to the public. So we're really excited to see what agencies submit in September to OMB, and then that will be reviewed and further developed as part of the annual budget process, and a President's Management Agenda will be published in February, as I said. I think it's worth just taking a look, though, at these 4 goals, because we'd really love to continue to be a partner with all of you in dialogue as we develop these. So 1 and 3, I think, really get at all the things we were talking about in the Section 5 pilot. Federal agencies are managing programs and delivering critical services more effectively. And 3, federal agencies are more effective and efficient in supporting program outcomes. And that kind of gets at the efficient, good government, lines of work that really a bunch of our information technology and data standards and reporting requirements kind of undergirds. And so we look forward to that being an area that we can really push on in the next couple of years. Number 2, I think federal agencies are devoting a greater percentage of taxpayer dollars to mission achievement rather than costly, unproductive compliance activities. I know that is one that will resonate with this group because we often hear from all of you about federal requirements for unproductive compliance activities that could be done away with. But I encourage you to think about this one as well. And I think, I know you all have had conversations over the course of the past 2 days about the budget and what that is going to look like. And so I think, all of us know that the mission support and compliance activities that are part of research are essential to that research getting done. But I think the question that is on the table is how can that be done less expensively? And what's the most efficient way for us to account for all of that and really hold ourselves accountable for doing it as efficiently as possible? And so I would just open the door to all of you that we're interested in ideas for how we can be creative there. And then number 4, agencies have been held accountable for improving performance. And I think that's one that really gets to what you saw there on usaspending.gov. We've connected the dots now for the first time from that account level information through program activity or object class or accounting codes to the awards. And this opens the door to the question, what other information would you want to see that would really help us hold agencies accountable and our partners in carrying out a public purpose for achieving our mission with taxpayer dollars? So these are the areas we're exploring, and there will be more to come in February, but we certainly welcome the dialogue and ideas from all of you in the meantime. And with that, here is contact information for future questions, but I think we have time to take a few now. Anything else you'd like to add before we open it up?
No, let's open it up.
All right. Questions? Yeah?
I have one question as well.
Sure. No, that's all right.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to ask with respect to the slide that you just had shown with respect to reducing compliance activities, spending a greater proportion of taxpayer dollars on the mission. It just seems, and maybe this is just in the short term, that the only conversations that the administration was willing to have was with respect to cutting F&A. You want to cut your facilities administrative costs, talk to us about regulatory reform, but it really seems that you have to make those changes, and then over time, one would think that you would see a reduction in compliance costs. So I'm just hoping that the administration is willing to have that dialogue outside of the facilities and administrative conversation, given the language in the most recent spending bills. I just wonder if their interest is going to wane. I would hope not, and so I hope.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I will certainly take that back, that there is a hope that we will expand that conversation. I think we've been carrying that message internally because I think we know everyone in this room would probably agree that the F&A activities that support research, you can't get research done without them. I think the question is, the way that cost information is presented often to an outsider looks very separate from research. We all know that those are very deeply integrated in practice, but because they're just negotiated as separate processes, someone coming in new who's not familiar with the process, it takes some explaining to get up to speed on how that works and why we do it that way and how those costs are allocated. And in this environment where people are looking for how can we be sure that each and every award we make is being managed as efficiently as possible, that with the absolute right amount of dollars that it needs and not a dollar more, Where are the points of negotiation that are available for what those dollars look like and what those costs are that are covered and accounted for. I think this administration is very interested in pursuing those questions about how we can do that better. And so I think we understand that probably no one in this room wants to see any agency's indirect costs capped at 10%. But we have to, I think, come back with ideas about how we could otherwise achieve that same goal of making sure that we're most efficient with those dollars. So I certainly agree that starting the conversation more broadly than F&A by itself and looking at what are those regulatory requirements in part that drive those costs is absolutely part of that conversation and needs to be. And I think anything that we can do to put another idea on the table that allows us to make that case is welcome.
Victoria, I'd like to lower from the heights of your talk into the weeds for just a moment.
Okay.
Back when you were involved in uniform guidance, and maybe you still are, there was a section on procurement standards. And as you probably know, the implementation of the procurement standards has been deferred. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be deferred forever, at least we hope not. However, we're in somewhat of an awkward position because we would like to move forward, and particularly with regard to the micro procurement standards. And we're searching for the identity of somebody in the federal government who can respond to our requests for next steps if we want to move forward with implementing procurement standards that go beyond what's currently in the guidance, which is at the moment on hold for another year. So can you tell us to whom we should be directing these questions? Because we've tried various routes and really haven't found anyone who is willing to respond.
Yeah, thank you. So I know the micro purchase threshold question is one that has been of utmost importance to this community and is one of those areas where I think we were all surprised when that uniform guidance came out with how that was received. I think no one anticipated it would be the source of administrative burden that it has turned out to be. And we've been looking for solutions, and in the meantime, the solution has been put it on hold. But I think we all understand that conversation isn't over. And I think the tricky thing right now is just, it's twofold. One, I think we had a number of policy solutions on the table at first, one being get rid of the micro purchase threshold in the guidance altogether and allow organizations to set their own thresholds. But then at a certain point, maybe we delayed a little too long, and Congress went ahead and legislated a micro purchase threshold, which now, as you all know, supersedes anything OMB might put in guidance. So we have that additional piece of kind of the rule that's come into place. And I think, there's a fair question about what can still be done to build out that policy further or to make a process clear that incorporates that threshold. And I think now it's a question of timing, really, more than anything, because we have all these other policy ideas, things that could potentially happen, and so we want to make sure we don't make a piecemeal change that's in any way short-sighted of a larger, more fundamental change that may be coming right around the corner and doesn't appropriately accommodate that. So it's unfortunately, we're just in a little bit of this transition timeline while we wait and see, or we continue to develop those, that sort of next generation of broader, even more broad and fundamental policy changes and what that might look like. But in the meantime, if your narrow question truly is who can we talk to, OMB and OFFM is always here to have that conversation, and we're happy to discuss with you what interim short-term steps might be needed.
You give us phone numbers,
Well, I'd be happy to start, and I can take it back to the team.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bible from Stanford University. And back in January of this year, President Trump signed a directive about when one rule is added, two are eliminated. I'd like to understand what the status of that is, and if we can get a list of the rules that have been added and eliminated.
Yeah, great question. So the rule was for every piece of regulation that is published, two must be rescinded. And that, for a large amount of time, is a part of why no further guidance from OMB has been forthcoming. So be careful what you wish for. But that rule is still in effect. It's now, there's a little bit more room for negotiation of what is a new rule versus what is an amendment to an existing rule that may reduce administrative burden, like in the impact. It all gets very technical, very fast in terms of like this is a new regulation with new requirements versus it is being published as a rule, but it actually amends or even in fact reduces the amount of regulation in total. So we've gotten a little more nuanced, I think, in that regard. But I would have to defer to my OIRA colleagues for the complete list of what has been rescinded and added in that time. I suspect they do have it, and it's certainly in the Federal Register, if nowhere else. But if you'd like me to help find something specific for you,
Yeah,
I'd be happy to.
if you can just point us in the right direction so we can go over.
Sure. Yeah.
So understanding that we are in still a transition time, do you have any sense of when we might see some other types of activity, like, for example, OSTP being repopulated, or how this research policy board is going to be convened, when we might start seeing information about that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so OSTP being repopulated, I think there are a number of positions in government that folks are very interested in having repopulated, OSTP certainly being one of them. The administration just this past Friday published or sent to the Senate 46 nominations for new officials that need to be Senate confirmed. And as you can imagine, that is really, I think the focus sort of starts at the highest levels and then they kind of go from there with filling in the gaps. So those folks that have to be Senate confirmed, I think have been first on the list. Two of those, I'm very happy to say, were one, our new Deputy Director for Management, Margaret Weichert, and our new Controller, Fred Nutt, in the Office of Federal Financial Management. So we are really delighted that we have new leadership and really look forward to those guys being confirmed. I can't speak to OSTP, but I know that they are on the list along with everyone else where they're working as hard as they can to repopulate those positions. And your second question.
Research policy board.
Oh, the Research Policy Board. Yeah, that efforts have begun, I can say, to kind of outline the policy, to kind of outline the contours of how that will be implemented. And I expect that there will be, more to say publicly very soon. But yeah.
Hello, I'm Kelly Shaver from the College of Charleston. I would like to ask you a couple of questions, well, just one really, or probably it's more like a comment about number 4. I would hope that in the attempt to ensure accountability